Welcome, you guys, to my first taxing subjects Zoom. Thanks for joining me. I'll just let people in as they come, but I want to get started. I know you guys all know me, but my name is Shay, and I have been doing taxes for about 20 years, and it's been on my heart to do these interactive Q&As for a year or so now. So I'm finally doing it, and I just want to give people an opportunity to meet with professionals and get comfortable and get some questions answered for free in hopes that obviously eventually they'll become clients. But I also just like being able to educate people and provide referrals to other great professionals in the area. So today I have Erin Turco with EVT Consulting joining me, and Erin actually started out as one of my clients' bookkeepers. That's how I met her, and then she became a client of mine, and now for the last few years we've been referring business back and forth, and I think have both found value in being able to offer our clients other professionals that provide the same high quality level of service that we do. And I don't offer bookkeeping, so it's been really helpful to my clients to be able to provide a professional that I know is going to give the same one-on-one service that I give and just provide the same level of service. So thanks for joining me, Erin. And if you want to just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your business quickly.
So I started bookkeeping about 10 years ago for a family that owns 8 different companies in the real estate industry. They're in different areas. So they have investment properties, they have appraisal, they manage some appraisers, lots of different things. So that's kind of where I got started about 10 years ago after I graduated college. I still do the books for their 8 companies, but a couple of years ago, I had some medical things come up and I couldn't work for them full time anymore. And to kind of make ends meet, I started taking on some small clients. The client that Shay mentioned was actually my very first client. And everything kind of just grew from there very organically. I haven't really had to do a lot of advertising. I work mostly on referrals. So Shay has been very important to my business. Some other referral partners that I have been great for building that business.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Hi, Jessica. I see you just popped in here. Good to see you. Well, this is supposed to be a Q&A for you guys. So if you have any questions, feel free to pipe in. But we also have some questions for each other that we thought we'd ask just to go over some basic bookkeeping stuff. So do you guys have any questions before we get started? Well, I would like to know from Erin what exactly a bookkeeper does and why would someone need one?
So bookkeepers are really here to support the business owners in their financial needs in terms of record keeping, tracking income and expenses, planning, budgeting, forecasting, running reports that can help make business decisions from a financial standpoint, and really to just alleviate some pressure on business owners because very rarely do business owners start their business and think about bookkeeping or they're keeping track of all of those things. So it's one of the biggest stressors I hear from business owners is their books. So having someone that can really focus on that and help them get all that information they need, make sure they're ready for their taxes at the end of the year is really just a big relief of stress.
Definitely from a tax standpoint, tax time is already usually stressful enough for small business owners. For people that are getting big refunds, they're like, you're on tax time, but most of us have to pay and we're a lot excited about it. And then if you add in the stress of having to gather all your information and try to summarize it into a way that you can prepare the tax return, that just adds a whole nother level of stress. And just for me personally, I got to a point where I couldn't do tax returns and do that during tax season. So a few years ago, I started telling my clients that they really need to be using a bookkeeper throughout the year, if not monthly and regularly, at least quarterly check-ins to make sure that everything's going in there accurately and is ready to go at tax time. Because I think probably one of the things that happens most when people don't have a good bookkeeping system in place is that they miss out on a lot of deductions because they forget about things or receipts get lost. And so they end up paying more tax than they need to. So that's my reason for wanting people to have a good bookkeeping system in place. But it also just provides so much data for you throughout the year to be able to tell how your company is doing. And if you need to do quarterly estimates, it's nice to be able to pull a quick profit and loss statement and see how your company's done so far so that you can do projections and know how much you should be paying in. So I'm definitely a fan of using a bookkeeper.
Yes, and there's lots of things that people don't understand that bookkeepers do. For me, I have a tiered service system where I really try and fit my services to the client. And some of them really want to do their own books and they just want a second set of eyes to tell them, am I missing anything? Am I categorizing things wrong? Can you help me run reports when I don't know what I'm looking for? And so I do kind of quarterly check-in with those types of clients. And then I have some clients who want me to do everything. I do invoicing, accounts receivable and payable, everything that encompasses accounting for their business. And then I have people that kind of fall in between. So it's really fluid how it can work for different businesses because every business and everyone needs different things.
Yeah, I think it's really great that you offer those different levels of service because I know a lot of people do like to have a little bit of control or they have the time and they want to feel like they're contributing to their business. So they want to do a little bit of it. So it's nice that you offer different tiers of service. And I bet a lot of people start out with maybe wanting you to just review quarterly and then realize how nice it is to have you
Yep.
taking that on. And maybe
Yeah, it's interesting because it goes both ways. I definitely have some people that just want me to do the quarterly reviews and we start out that way and then it grows into me taking things over as their business grows. I've also had people who have a couple of years worth of cleanup work to do. They're backlogged and all of their data and we get it cleaned up and then they decide, hey, we're cleaned up and I want to learn how to do it right so it doesn't happen again. And then they move down to the quarterly. So it can really happen either way.
interesting. I don't know if you've had this experience, but for me, I usually find that cleanups are more expensive than it would have been to just have someone doing the work to begin with. A lot of times
Absolutely. Yes.
people might think that they're saving money, but then I know there was a big issue with QuickBooks Online last year. Somehow they were duplicating transactions pulled in from Square. So a couple of my small business owners, their financial statements, if I wasn't paying attention, I would have just prepared their return and they would have paid way too much in tax. But I noticed and was like, this is a huge jump from last year. Did your business really grow this much? No, their income was being duplicated into their QuickBooks and they didn't even realize it. So
It's interesting. So QuickBooks, they do a lot of updates and they try and offer new things to clients, but they don't really do a lot of explaining or training on how they're going to affect the overall picture. And what they did is they implemented these apps that you can integrate with your QuickBooks, and Square was one of them. And essentially it pulls all of the data from Square and puts it into QuickBooks. But then when you're linking your bank account as well, it's going to show everything that goes in and out of your bank account. So you have to recognize that this was already input in QuickBooks from the app and not from the bank. So you ignore the bank one. A lot of people didn't realize it and they were just duplicating everything.
So what do you think are the most important financial statements for people to be looking at? Are there certain ones that you provide monthly or quarterly on a regular basis?
Quarterly, I do balance sheet and profit and loss, which are the ones that pretty much everyone is familiar with. Balance sheet is going to tell you assets and liabilities and all that good stuff. Profit and loss is usually what I use when people are planning their growth and want to forecast what's going to happen. There are reports for cash flow too that are really helpful. Some people have there are different methods of ways to do business accounting, and there's one actually pretty popular one where people make use of like 7 different accounts for different aspects of their business. And when you have that many accounts, it's really hard to get a big picture of money that's going in and out and where it's going. And so I use a lot of cash flow reports to help demonstrate that for the client so they can see actually the money that is going in and out in a big picture. And then QuickBooks really has reports for everything and they're customizable. So I run a lot of custom reports for clients too. Everyone has different ideas of what they need.
So
So
your
there's
clients
a
can
lot of
just tell
variety in
you,
reporting.
just kind of tell you what data they want to see, and you're able to go in and generate a custom report and then save it so it can.
Exactly. Ones that I run regularly are those big 3. We do a lot of collections reports for customers who aren't paying on time. There's just reports for everything.
Do you use QuickBooks Online predominantly, or what other bookkeeping softwares do you use?
Yeah, I primarily use QuickBooks Online. I was using Wave for some clients that didn't want to pay those QuickBooks fees. They had a free version, but they just reformatted all of their plans. And so the free version really doesn't offer a whole lot anymore. So I'm in the process of transitioning most of those clients to QuickBooks Online.
Have you used FreshBooks at all?
I have not. It's on my to-do list to start researching some of those other free and lower cost options just to see what else is out there because Wave was really the most user-friendly that I found a few years ago. Now that it's not really feasible If you're going to pay that, you're going to just pay for QuickBooks because everyone knows it. But FreshBooks is one that I've got on my list to look into.
I think FreshBooks does this too, but the thing I love the most about QuickBooks Online is the app that I can just take pictures of the receipt and it saves it and matches it up with the expense when it pulls it over from the bank feed, and then I don't have to save a bunch of paper receipts.
Yes, that is definitely one of my favorites too. Some clients don't. So another thing that as a bookkeeper I do a lot is matching up the receipts. What happens is QuickBooks thinks that it's smarter than everyone. So sometimes it pulls in the wrong amounts as a subtotal instead of the total. So you got to go in there and fix them and match them correctly. And a lot of people think when they scan the receipt, that's it. But it doesn't really do a whole lot until you match it.
Mm-hmm. I've been impressed at how well it'll, like on restaurants, when you leave a handwritten tip and then total it, it usually does a pretty good job of picking it up. But last month it said I spent $988 at Margarita Factory, and I was like, I know I did some
yeah, the decimals are, or it gets tripped up if they're not super clear, then it just kind of is where they belong.
Oh, I was also going to just ask if I know that pricing varies greatly, but how do you determine how much you're going to charge, and what are your basic range of fees for monthly bookkeeping services?
So I use an hourly rate for at least the first year, and typically that's because some clients are cleanup clients, some clients only need a little bit. So it really allows me to get whatever work done without undercutting myself and making sure that everything gets done in the amount of time that it needs to be done. My range is typically between 65 to 85 an hour, and that depends on the complexity of the client. Some things that contribute are if the client's located in Portland, there's that really fun new Portland tax that we've got. So I increase that fee a tiny bit if it's a Portland-based business. And then I also offer some admin services like data entry, helping with some of the apps. We use inventory systems and they need some management in there. And those rates are much lower. They're usually around 35 to 40 an hour.
Nice. Well, thanks for that. And so if people were interested in maybe turning their books over to a professional, do you offer a free consultation, and how long does that take? What would that process look like?
Yeah, I do free consultations, and they're usually 30 minutes to an hour, depending on everything in the situation. And then at that consultation, you'll get an hourly rate quoted. And then typically I can give you an estimate on the initial bulk part of the work. So it's even when you're bringing on a client that has up-to-date books, there's always an initial review process. There are some things that need to be tweaked sometimes, especially if it's not coming over from another bookkeeper. So I can give an estimate of how much time that is going to take in the first month. And then from there, we can cash out. Sometimes some clients want a budget per month. If it's a cleanup project, they're like, they don't want to spend over $1,000 per month. So then I can spread it out. We keep within their budget, but still get all of those goals met.
Nice. That's great. Hi, Laura. I saw you pop in here late, and hi, Jessica. Does anybody have any questions about what we've talked about so far, or really any tax or bookkeeping related topic?
I have a question about payroll. Is that part of your services? And is it important to have a separate person do payroll, or does a bookkeeper typically do that?
I do payroll on a limited basis. And the reason for that is because payroll is really a big job. There's a lot that goes along with what's needed. There's a lot of onboarding, reporting, filing taxes for payroll. So I use payroll services. So I can manage, right now I'm using Gusto. So I'm an advisor for Gusto, and I can do the setup and manage payroll if you're using that service. But outside of that, I don't do QuickBooks payroll, but I have some referral partners that I refer my clients to when they're looking for payroll services other than that simple Gusto plan.
Okay. Is that something that a small business owner can do themselves easily? In my case, I have one employee, and then I pay myself and then my husband and kids quarterly just for tax purposes. I'm wondering if it's necessary to be paying the expense of having someone do payroll if it's just entering the same number into QuickBooks every month. Is it that easy, or am I delusional?
For situations like that, I honestly recommend services like Gusto. It's pretty cheap. It's like $40 to $50 a month just for the fees. And then you can input payroll schedules. It's super user friendly to get set up. They have all the onboarding tools on there already. And if it's really just you and your family members, it's the easiest, most inexpensive way to do it. You could do QuickBooks payroll, but honestly, the subscription is more expensive. And if something goes wrong, like you accidentally pay an incorrect tax amount, you have to go through and do the work to fix it. Whereas if you're using a payroll service, if they misappropriate some funds and they pay taxes wrong or whatever, they have representatives that will go through and help you fix those.
Shay, what do you see on your end when you're tax advising?
I have been really happy with Gusto too. That's what I recommend to my S Corp owners that just have to pay themselves on payroll. It's really user friendly. I think where people run into where I usually see issues is when it pulls into the books automatically. It usually doesn't do it right. You usually want an accountant doing a journal entry for the payroll to get it allocated correctly. It's not a huge deal. Usually with just the payroll reports, your accountant can figure out how it goes on the tax return at year end. But if you think about it, a bunch of money is coming out of your bank account, but it's not all wages. It's like some wages and some taxes. And so it's not going to be in the right categories in your books unless you're really thinking it through. But I've been really happy with Gusto, and I've had some clients have some really bad experiences with QuickBooks Online lately where they thought that things were being paid for them and QuickBooks was processing and putting the entries into their books, but no money was actually going anywhere. And I don't know how this happens, but one company, it had gone on for over a year and they were it was a lot of money and they didn't realize it hadn't been being paid. So I really like either Gusto or have someone that knows payroll doing it in QuickBooks Online Payroll. There's also a local company called A Time for Payroll. I think that's good if people want personal service.
Great. Thank you both. Great advice.
What do you use right now, Stephanie?
I use my accountant to do payroll.
They probably charge
such as the time that we're trying to cut down on some of those monthly recurring expenses.
I think you'd probably be really happy with Gusto.
They charge quite a bit for it, and I don't know that that's really worth it because it's literally the same amount every time.
I think Gusto would work really well for you. You can set up, and if the amounts and hours and stuff don't change, you can set up just an automated schedule. You just have to get it set up initially, and then it will run on its own on whatever schedule you set. And then, like Shay said, you just have to make sure that when those charges show up in your bank feeds, that you're categorizing them properly as wages or taxes or payroll fees.
And if Gusto splits it, does it split it out? Or does it pull it all out?
For the most part, it does. I'm trying to think what it calls it, but they have different memo lines that show up when they import. The only one that I've noticed that got mixed up is if you have an employee that has garnishments, it calls those wages. So you have to go into Gusto and make sure that you're categorizing those as garnishments instead of wages.
That's good to know.
I've got a few questions for you, Shay, if that's okay, if no one else has one. I am curious what the difference is between an enrolled agent and a CPA.
That is a question that I get asked a lot. So a CPA has a 4-year bachelor's degree, and then they have to do some on-the-job training underneath another CPA and then pass a pretty extensive exam to get that certification. And they can do all the things that I can do, and they can audit books. So CPAs are more like, I think of them more in larger corporations where you're like digging deep into the transactions and more accounting focused. An enrolled agent is just taxes, and it's a designation that the IRS gives, and it's 3 tests that we have to take too that are pretty extensive that have to do with personal income tax, business income tax, and then ethics. Once you're an enrolled agent with the IRS, you can represent clients in audit just like CPAs can, and I can prepare tax returns in all 50 states. Most states actually don't require you to be licensed to do taxes, so you can just hang a shingle out and charge people to do taxes with no education at all, which I think is really scary.
That's scary.
A few states that requires their own licensing, and so here in Oregon, you have to get a licensed tax preparer license to even touch a tax return. But with that license, you still have to work underneath either a licensed tax consultant or a CPA here in Oregon. So then after a few years of being a licensed tax preparer and a certain number of hours working, you can sit for the licensed tax consultant exam. And then that allows you to be a business owner and have preparers underneath you. It still doesn't allow you to represent clients with the IRS. You have to go get that enrolled agent certification from the IRS. So I like to say that I'm a better choice than a CPA because I've been focusing on just taxes for the last 20 years, and accountants, CPAs tend to do a lot more just bookkeeping, accounting type of work, and oftentimes don't know a lot about the actual tax return preparation part of it. So
Do enrolled agents have to go through the continuing education and stuff that CPAs do?
I'm not sure what the CPA's hours requirement is. Theirs might be a little higher. I have to do about 30 hours a year of continuing education.
Nice. Earlier, you had mentioned some of the things that business owners miss out on when they're getting write-offs and such. What are some of the most overlooked things that people are missing out on?
For small business owners, I think the things I see the most are, like I mentioned, just forgetting things, not necessarily a certain category, but just not having all of the data there to be able to account for everything. A lot of people don't realize that they can write off a portion of their cell phone bill and a portion of their internet bill if they're using those things for business. And that's a pretty subjective area. I think different accountants will handle it different ways, but for me personally, I feel like it's reasonable to split those things 50-50. You would need the internet for your business and you probably need it for personal, same with your cell phone. So you can allocate those differently if you really feel like I'm using my cell phone 90% for business and I hardly ever use it for personal. You can allocate it that way, but I usually feel like 50-50 is pretty reasonable. Also, if you're using your vehicle for any part of your business, then that can be a deduction. If you're just a sole proprietorship or an LLC, then you can claim it on your personal return. If you have an S corp, you'd want to reimburse yourself out of the company for the mileage. One big thing I've seen missed lately by S corporations is not doing those reimbursements under an accountable plan, because once you become an S corp, you have to be an employee of your corporation. And now, since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2018, there's no more employee related business expense deductions. So where you used to be able to take a home office deduction as an employee, now you can't. So the way around that is for the S corp to have an accountable plan where they reimburse you for your home office space. Then it becomes a deduction to the business, but that reimbursement isn't taxable income to you on the personal side. So that's one thing that I see business owners just not realize a lot. The other is the Augusta rule for renting out your personal home. You can rent out your home for up to 2 weeks a year and not have to claim that income as rental income. So that works out great for people that are in cities where Super Bowl's coming or the Olympics or something like that. They can decide to rent out their house for a week for 10 grand and have tax-free income. But it can also help if you're a business owner, because your business can rent your home from you for your monthly board meetings or for your holiday party or things that you would normally use your home for anyway. You can rent it to yourself at fair market rental value and again get a deduction in the business that you don't have to claim as income on the other side.
Awesome. That one, I actually heard about it recently, and I had been meaning to send you an email to get more information about it because I think it was like a TikTok that I saw. Like, I think there's more that I need to know about this.
The thing that people don't know about a lot is hiring your kids. Stephanie mentioned it, that she has her kids on payroll through her S corporation, and that's great. If you have just a sole proprietorship or an LLC that's not incorporated, then the IRS allows you to pay your kids who are under 18 and you don't have to pay the FICA tax. So you don't have to pay the Social Security and Medicare tax. So essentially, if you're not paying them very much throughout the year, you don't even really have to file any reports. You don't have to do any payroll reports because you don't have to pay those taxes. And they recommend doing a W-2 just so there's a record of the wages. But unless the child has a filing requirement, you don't even really need to do that. And you're allowed to pay your kids, so you can take the deduction on the business side as wages, and the child probably won't have to pay tax on it.
Is there a age requirement for that? I know under 18, but on the lower end?
IRS wants them doing reasonable work. So some people, I've heard that some accountants won't allow that until they're 9 or 10 years old, but I think in this age of social media and modeling, that you can have your child appearing in your advertising as young as birth, really. Like if you're using their images as models in your marketing and advertising, then I think you would have a reasonable case with the IRS to have them on payroll.
It's great to know. What point in a business's growth would you normally see or suggest that they switch from an LLC or sole proprietorship to a corporation?
That is another excellent question that a lot of accountants and attorneys have different ideas on. But for me personally, I don't advise my clients to make that switch until their business is netting at least $100,000. And the reason for that is when you make the S Corp election, you have to start paying yourself on payroll. And where the tax savings comes from when you make that election is the amount above and beyond what you pay yourself on payroll is no longer subject to the Social Security and Medicare taxes. So for example, when you're just on a Schedule C single member LLC, all of your net income is subject to the Social Security and Medicare tax, the self-employment tax. When you put yourself on payroll through an S corporation, the part that you're paying yourself on payroll, you're essentially still paying that self-employment tax. It's just split up a little differently. You're paying half of it by having it withheld from your pay, and then your company is paying half of it on your behalf, but you are your company, so you're still paying both halves of the payroll portion. But then the rest of the money that the company makes on top of that is a distribution, and it's only taxed for income tax purposes, not self-employment tax purposes. So if your company is only making as much as you would pay yourself anyway, there's not really any point in switching. It really happens when your company starts making money beyond what you're doing work-wise. So I like to think of it like, could you hire somebody to do what you're doing and step back completely and let the business run and still make money? Because that's kind of what it's intended for, is that you aren't the sole money earner. People do use it. There's lots of single owner businesses that make the election just to save money on taxes. But ultimately, the goal is you're paying your employees and the company is still making money on top of that. So once people get to that point, you can save quite a bit of money by switching to an S corp. But there's also a lot of extra accounting and paperwork and stuff that goes into it. So unless they are willing to hire a bookkeeper full-time, I don't advise it, because your books can get really messy. And for a Schedule C business, it's not that big of a deal because we don't even look at the balance sheet when we're preparing tax returns for Schedule C businesses. Have to report the balance sheet and keep track of how much of their own equity is going into the company and coming out of the company. And it can get kind of complicated if you don't have a good record system in place. So I want to make sure they have a bookkeeper. They're going to have some sort of payroll service to pay themselves. So if they don't already have employees, that can be another added expense to making that election. And then the tax return itself, people don't often realize that. I think most of my personal clients that have a Schedule C business pay maybe $800 to $1,000 for their personal tax return that includes the business all wrapped up into one. Just a business tax return alone is usually around $2,000, starting at $2,000. And then you still have to do the personal return too. So there's a lot of extra expenses that people don't think about that need to be factored in. It's not just the tax savings. You're going to have some extra expenses along the line. So usually I say netting 100,000 is a good time to start thinking about that.
That's a really good point about the balance sheet, because what I see in cleanup projects that I get for corporations is maybe 85% of the things that need to be fixed are from the balance sheet.
Definitely be a sticky area. Do you have a question, Stephanie?
So random question, since I've got you, and since I just was looking at a $3,500 bill to get my son's wisdom teeth out and realized that I did not contribute to my HSA account yet this year, is that something that I can fund throughout the year and still get the benefit? Because it's $7,000, isn't it? Do you know that off the top of your head?
Yep, you can. There's a maximum that you can put into your HSA per year. So if you're doing it throughout the year, you want to make sure you're keeping track so that you don't over contribute. You can definitely put money in during the year. I had a client a while back that they would literally, their daughter had some very expensive medication. And so they would put the money into their HSA and then immediately spend it on the medication. But by doing that extra step, then they were getting to deduct it on their taxes.
But I could just fund the amount that I know I'm going to use right now. And then if something else comes up later in the year, I can fund a little bit more and use that, because I don't want to overfund and not use it.
But with the HSA, it's not like the FSAs where it's use it or lose it. The HSA, they're forever. Even if you end up later on having a different plan that's not a high deductible plan, you wouldn't be able to contribute to it anymore, but the money would still sit there and be yours to use on eligible medical expenses whenever. So you wouldn't ever lose out on it. Usually I tell people, if you have the money to max out your HSA every year to get the tax savings, do it, because some people are using that as a little bit of a retirement savings too, because you're going to have medical expenses when you're old. And so the more you can sock away in that, even if later on you're on a different plan that you can't keep contributing to it, the money's still there. It was still tax-free and it can still be used on medical whenever you need it.
Awesome. Thanks. I'll do it today.
That payroll service Gusto does support HSA and FSA and 1001 or 1010. The number's not coming to me. Your retirement accounts. It can do all of those deductions too, and you can link all of those accounts there. If you are setting up that payroll service, that might be something to look into too. So it does it automatically for you.
So is that something that I could, so I currently do a medical reimbursement for my one employee that she can pay for her own medical expenses. Is that something is there some tax trick with that instead of, I'm just giving her $500 a month and then she uses it for whatever she wants? I'd be putting that into some sort of an account for her that she could use. Is there any benefit to that?
So when you give her the $500 a month, are you deducting it as a
I am. It's a,
employee benefit or?
yeah, it's like an employee reimbursement is what it shows up on my payroll as.
Does she have to provide proof that she spent it on medical?
No.
She spend it on whatever. You're getting the tax savings out of it, so I don't know if there would be a change necessary on your end for that purpose, but there might be other things that I'm not aware of in those type of plans that could benefit from switching.
Thanks.
On the topic of retirement, that reminded me of something else that a lot of self-employed people don't realize is you can put quite a bit more money into retirement as a self-employed individual if you open a SEP IRA rather than a traditional IRA. I think the maximum for a traditional IRA is $7,000 a year right now. With the SEP IRA, you can put up to 20. They say 25% of your net, but don't do the calculation yourself because if you do, it'll be wrong. But it's about 25% of your net income up to a maximum of 60,000, 66,000, I think, per year. So if your company is doing really well and you're looking for a way to save money on taxes and get a lot more into your retirement plan, a SEP IRA can be a really good option. And then if you have made the S Corp election, there's options for you too with the 401ks and stuff like that. But I find that a lot of people don't know about the SEP IRA. Laura, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I have a business and my husband has a business and he also works full time doing another job. And so I feel like a lot of times tax season rolls around and it's just kind of a mess trying to bring everything together. And we do need a bookkeeper. And so that's something obviously, but is there a way to, I don't know, make it less complicated, or is that just how it is? Just because in the past we've just like, okay, I have to gather all my information and he has to gather all his, and then we have to use his W-2 and all of that. Is there a way to streamline that? What are your
Well, if
thoughts
you
on
use somebody like me for your taxes, I sent
Absolutely.
out a nice digital organizer at the beginning of tax season that I'm first year with me. It has lots of fields that apply to everything because I don't know what's going on with you. But then the next year it'll be customized to what you had the prior year. So there'll be upload fields for each thing that you had before. So that will help remind you like, oh, I'm missing my 1099 interest statement from On Point. I had that last year. I better go find that. But as far as your business, self-employed expenses, that's probably always going to be, the more businesses you have, the more paperwork you have. I do have a nice little worksheet that I give my clients that allows them to summarize all of their business stuff onto one page. So that might be really helpful for you and your husband. You could each have one where you detail out all your income and expenses. And that way it's just one piece of paper instead of a whole handful of receipts. I don't know if you have any input, Erin, as a bookkeeper.
So I actually have a kind of Excel document that I've created for some of my potential clients that don't necessarily want to make the jump to having a full-time or having a bookkeeper do all of their books. And it is formatted to do all of the math for you. It'll give you essentially a profit and loss mini statement, and all you have to do is put in your income and expenses throughout the year. And I sell that for $75, and it's just a one-time fee. Or really the ease the end of the year when it's time to do taxes with a bookkeeper, all of that is kind of buttoned up for you already, and you just have to print off your profit and loss, and that's usually it.
Or if you work with a team like me and Erin, sometimes you don't even have to do that part because I can just go to her and get what I need and you don't have to do anything at all.
That sounds nice. Well, and then on that, another question I have, you guys were talking about, so he has a LLC, and currently, I don't know, we're at the point where we can't really pay for employees or anything like that, but he has hired for services and things like that. And since I'm a virtual assistant social media manager and he needs to hire one, how does that go with when it's your family? I know I'm really green in all of this, but
You can absolutely be his contractor. You can be a vendor for his company, and you just kind of
You could be an employee too, either one.
you just have to keep in mind 1099s at the end of the year. If you're a contractor, those are due by January 31st. Service that I provide too for existing clients. I've had some people come to me on January 15th and they're like, hey, I need to get these out, but I don't know that their records are accurate at that point. So at the end of the year, I don't take those on, but if I have an ongoing client, I will do 1099s for them as well.
thank you.
So just for those of you in here, Laura is my new social media manager, which I'm very excited about, and she's been doing great. So if you are in need of that type of service, I can totally vouch for her.
Thank you.
And then the other Laura in the room is going to be my guest next month. This is Laura Donaldson that I share office space with in Gladstone, and she's going to be on here next month talk about debt resolution sort of.
Sorry, I popped off for a second there. My Zoom is not behaving, so I apologize for that. Thanks, Shay, for the invite. This has been great.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for coming. I think we covered a lot, and I'm glad that you guys had some questions for us. Thank you. Is there
Absolutely
anything else we can answer for you before we wrap things up? Did you have any more questions, Erin?
No, I don't think so. If it's okay though, I can put my email into the notes in case anyone has additional questions or wants to set up a consultation.
Okay, that would be great. Well, thank you all for coming to my very first taxing subjects Zoom. I'm excited. I think this is going to be a fun way to answer people's questions, learn more about each other, and be better consumers.